Harry Potter, he called. Harry, up here, if you please. Go on, Hermione whispered, giving Harry a slight push. Harry got to his feet, trod onto the hem of his robes, and stumbled slightly. He set off up the gap between the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff tables. It felt like an immensely long walk. The top table didn't seem to get any nearer at all, and he could feel hundreds and hundreds of eyes upon him, as though each was a searchlight. The buzzing grew louder and louder. After what seemed like an hour, he was right in front of Dumbledore, feeling the stares of all the teachers upon him. Well, through the door, Harry, said Dumbledore. He wasn't smiling. Harry moved off again along the teacher's table. Hagrid was sat right at the end. He did not wink at Harry, or wave, or give any of his usual signs of greeting. He looked completely astonished, and stared at Harry as he passed, like everyone else. Harry went through the door, out of the great hall, and found himself in a smaller room, lined with paintings of witches and wizards. A handsome fire was roaring in the fireplace opposite him. The faces in the portraits turned to look at him as he entered. He saw a wizened witch flit out of the frame of her picture and into the one next to it, which contained a wizard with a walrus moustache. The wizened witch started whispering in his ear. Victor Crumb, Cedric Diggory, and Fleur Delacour were grouped around the fire. They looked strangely impressive, silhouetted against the flames. Crumb, hunched up and brooding, was leaning against the mantelpiece, slightly apart from the other two. Cedric was standing with his hands behind his back, staring into the fire. Fleur Delacour looked around when Harry walked in, and threw back her sheet of long silvery hair. "What is it?" she said. "Do they want us back in the hall?" She thought he had come to deliver a message. Harry didn't know how to explain what had just happened. He just stood there, looking at the three champions. It struck him how very tall all of them were. There was a sound of scurrying feet behind him. Ludo Bagman entered the room. He took Harry by the arm and led him forwards. "Extraordinary," he muttered, squeezing Harry's arm. "Absolutely extraordinary. Gentlemen, lady," he added, approaching the fireside and addressing the other three, "may I introduce, incredibly though it may be, the fourth Triwizarding Champion." Victor Crumb straightened up. His surly face darkened as he surveyed Harry. Cedric looked nonplussed. Nonplussed? He looked from Bagman to Harry and back again, as though sure he must have misheard what Bagman had said. Fleur Delacour, however, tossed her hair, smiling, and said, "Oh, very funny joke, Mr. Bagman." "Joke?" Bagman repeated, bewildered. "No, not at all. Harry's name just came out of the Goblet of Fire." Crumb's thick eyebrows contracted slightly. Cedric was still looking politely bewildered. Fleur frowned. "But evidently there has been a mistake," she said contemptuously to Bagman. "He cannot compete. He is too young." "Well, it is amazing," said Bagman, rubbing his smooth chin and smiling down at Harry. "But as you know, the age restriction was only imposed this year as an extra safety measure, and as his name came out of the goblet, I don't think there's any way of ducking out of that at this stage. It's down in the rules. You're obliged. Harry will just have to do the best he—" The door behind them opened again, and a large group of people came in. Professor Dumbledore, followed closely by Mr. Crouch, Professor Karkaroff, Madame Maxime, Professor McGonagall, and Professor Snape. Harry heard the buzzing of hundreds of students on the other side of the wall before Professor McGonagall closed the door. "Madame Maxime," said Fleur at once, striding over to her headmistress. "They are saying that this little boy is to compete also." Somewhere under Harry's numb disbelief he felt a ripple of anger. "Little boy!" Madame Maxime had drawn herself up to her full and considerable height. The top of her handsome head brushed the candle-filled chandelier, and her gigantic black satin bosom swelled. "What is the meaning of this, Dumbledore?" she said imperiously. "I'd rather like to know that myself, Dumbledore," said Karkaroff. He was wearing a steely smile, and his blue eyes were like chips of ice. "Two Hogwarts champions? I don't remember anyone telling me that the house school is allowed two champions. Or have I not read the rules carefully enough?" He gave a short and nasty laugh. "C'est impossible," said Madame Maxime, whose enormous hand, with its many superb opals were resting upon Fleur's shoulder. Hogwarts cannot have two champions. It's most unjust. We were under the impression that your age line would keep out younger contestants, Dumbledore, said Karkaroff, his steely smile still in place, though his eyes were colder than ever. Otherwise, we would, of course, have brought along a wider selection of candidates from our own schools. It's no one's fault but Potter's, Karkaroff, said Snape softly. His black eyes were alight with malice. Don't go blaming Dumbledore for Potter's determination to break rules. He has been crossing lines ever since he arrived here. Thank you, Severus, said Dumbledore firmly, and Snape went quiet, though his eyes still glinted malevolently through his curtain of greasy black hair. Professor Dumbledore was now looking down at Harry, who looked right back at him, trying to discern the impression in the eyes behind the half-moon spectacles. Did you put your name into the Goblet of Fire, Harry? Dumbledore asked calmly. No, said Harry. He was very aware of everybody watching him closely. Snape made a soft noise of impatient disbelief in the shadows. Did you ask an older student to put your name in the Goblet of Fire for you? Said Professor Dumbledore, ignoring Snape. No, said Harry vehemently. Ah, but of course he is lying, said Madame Maxime. Snape was now shaking his head, his lip curling. He could not have crossed the age line, said Professor McGonagall sharply. I am sure we are all agreed on that. Dumbledore must have made a mistake with the line, said Madame Maxime, shrugging. It is impossible, of course, said Dumbledore politely. Dumbledore, you know perfectly well that you did not make a mistake, said Professor McGonagall angrily. Really, what nonsense. Harry could not have crossed that line himself, as Professor Dumbledore believes that he did not persuade an older student to do it for him. I am sure that should be good enough for everybody else. She shot a very angry look at Professor Snape. Mr. Crouch, Mr. Beckman, said Kirkcroft, his voice unctuous once more. You are our objective judges. Surely you will agree that this is most irregular. Bagman wiped his round, boyish face with his handkerchief and looked at Mr. Crouch, who was standing outside the circle of the firelight, his face half hidden in shadow. He looked slightly eerie in the half-darkness, making him look much older, giving him an almost skull-like appearance. When he spoke, however, it was with his usual curt voice. We must follow the rules, and the rules state clearly that those people whose names come out of the Goblet of Fire are bound to compete in the tournament. Well, Barty knows the rule book back and front, said Bagman, beaming and turning back to Karkaroff and Madame Maxime as though the matter was now closed. I insist upon resubmitting the names of the rest of the students, said Karkaroff. He had dropped his unctuous tone in his smile now. His face wore a very ugly look indeed. You will set up the Goblet of Fire once more, and we will continue adding names until each school has 2 champions. It's only fair, Dumbledore. But Karkaroff, it doesn't work like that, said Bagman. The Goblet of Fire has just gone out. It won't reignite until the start of the next tournament, in which Durmstrang will most certainly not be competing, exploded Karkaroff. After all our meetings and negotiations and compromises, I little expected something of this nature to occur. I half a mind to leave now. Empty threats, Karkaroff, growled a voice from near the door. You can't leave your champion now. He's got to compete. They've all got to compete. Binding magical contract, like Dumbledore said. Convenient, eh? Moody had just entered the room. He limped towards the fire, and with every right step that he took, there was a loud clunk. Convenient, said Karkaroff. I'm afraid I don't understand you, Moody. Harry could tell that he was trying to sound disdainful, as though what Moody was saying was barely worth his notice, but his hands gave him away. They were balled themselves into fists. Don't you? Said Moody quietly. It's very simple, Karkaroff. Someone put Potter's name in that goblet, knowing that he'd have to compete if it came out. Evidently someone who wishes to give Hogwarts 2 bites at the apple, said Madame Maxime. I quite agree, Madame Maxime, said Karkaroff, bowing to her. I shall be lodging complaints with the Ministry of Magic and the International Confederation of Wizards. If anyone's got a reason to complain, it's Potter, growled Moody. But funny thing, I don't hear him saying a word. Why should he complain? burst out Fleur Delacour, stamping her feet. "He has the chance to compete, hasn't he? We have all been hoping to be chosen for weeks and weeks. The honour for our schools, 1,000 galleons in prize money. This is a chance that Mindy would die for." "Maybe someone's hoping Potter is going to die for it," said Moody, with the merest trace of a growl. An extremely tense silence followed these words. Little Bagman, who was looking very anxious indeed, bounced nervously up and down on his feet and said, "Moody, old man, what a thing to say!" "We all know Professor Moody considers the morning wasted if he hasn't discovered 6 plots to murder him before lunchtime," said Karkaroff loudly. "Apparently, he is now teaching his students to fear assassination too. An odd quality in a Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, Dumbledore. But no doubt you had your reasons."